Hi everybody, I'm Steve Douglas, Chairman of SMATS Group and ATS. Today we're going to have a bit of a conversation around, some issues currently affecting all of our clients and the general community in the Middle East. Obviously, it's now, getting into a crisis. We've got Donald Trump, and Israel attacking, Iran, and that's subsequently now flowing into, the neighbours in the Middle East, in, the UAE, Qatar, and also Saudi, etc. So obviously this is very concerning for all of us, and from SMATS we send our heartfelt thoughts with you. Please keep safe, please look after it. Today we thought we would try and relieve a little bit of stress and pressure by talking to you about some of your options and also having a look at some of your tax implications if you are considering going somewhere else. So we'd like to just give you that sort of basis point and be available to support you if you need help with some decisions. Getting into it, I probably will always start with a disclaimer. Please make sure that don't take any of the advice in this slide or presentation. Personally, if you have issues specific to your thing, please come and see us. We won't charge you for those calls. Come and have a chat. We'd like to help. We want to make sure that you get what's best for you, not just in the general sense. And I suppose we'll start with probably the key element, and that's making those tough decisions. And what I'd like to remind you is that number one thing that should always be on your mind is safety. It's not a financial decision as to what you're going to do. Now, in the recent times, we've obviously had COVID. We've had the GFC many years ago. We've had all sorts of issues that go on, boom and bust in markets. But for the first time, this is something that's very specific. There's not many people that sign up to be in a war zone. And what's happened is a lot of people have been in the Middle East thinking everything's fine, everything's peaceful, and all of a sudden, by no fault of your own, you're now dragged into something. And this is a strange situation, different to many circumstances in the past, and you need to think about what's best for you and your family. As I mentioned, safety is number one. Whatever is safest for you, you should opt on that side. Finances you can sort out later, but if something goes wrong and you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's hard to hit rewind in that circumstance. And obviously it's a complex decision. You've got family issues if they're there with you, you've got schooling, what happens if you move the kids around, and things like, will your job be sustainable and will it still be there? Can you work remotely? All of these things. But these need to be assessed with sobriety and with sensibility, and impacted on a view that is probably hard to measure how long this is going to work. Now, again, Donald, it was apparently going in for just a couple of days, then now a couple of weeks, now maybe a couple of months. But the last time the US went into the Middle East, there was a place called Iraq. It ended up being there near on 20 years. So I think we've got to look at history as a bit of a judge. I don't think this is going to be over in a hurry, but you've got to be able to batten down the headlines. Now, whether it happens to be very quick and we don't need to think about it, or whether it ends up taking a long, long time, you are the one that has to make the judgment based on what you think either of those things will go. We'll see some clients that'll send their family back and the main worker might stay, or you can do it. But the key is, what do you feel the perceived risk is? Interestingly, in this early days, many of our clients feel that it's not too bad. There's defense, mechanisms. And again, as long as there is a defense, shield, that's sort of helping everybody out, giving them confidence. But to me, I'm not sure that is enough, and you can only measure yourself whether that risk is real or perceived, whether you're willing to accept it or whether you're willing to be precautionary. There'll obviously be a financial impact, not just in terms of your earnings, but how much does it cost? Do you still get cost of living? If you relocate somewhere, what is the cost of that relocation? Airfares, can you even get out of the country at the moment? The airports are open and closed at time. But you need to start assessing these things. And where will you go if you do leave the region? Availability in Australia, unfortunately, is very, very tough right now. We've got a situation where rental vacancy is very, very low. So even coming back to Australia, as has been in other times, is going to be harder for many people because the property is not necessarily available for you to be able to live in there with your family or have your spouse and kids go back. So this is going to be an issue as to where do you go. And Australia may not be the best option for you. You might go to Europe, you might go somewhere else for a period of time as a cheaper or more accessible option. So weigh all those things up. But there's no single answer. Everybody will have different circumstances, different situations, different financial impact. but you need to assess some of these and other issues when making the decision that is right for you and your family. In terms of, one of the key issues, just to remind you, for tax purposes, so that you don't have that as an additional burden of concern, if you are a non-resident for tax purposes living in the Middle East as an Australian, you'd know that your income there is tax-free. And just a very quick reminder is that to be a non-resident, you have to have permanently moved overseas for an intended period of 2 years or more, is what the ATO states. You've got to have a visa to be there. You need to have a home that you can show is where you live on a regular and consistent basis. And all of these things will be confirmed by the way you live your life, having a career with a contract, having your family with you or not, whether you've got belongings, and whether you can show and demonstrate your life is genuinely in that area. So this is all the key elements of residency. Most of you would qualify. If you're living in the Middle East and you intend to be there for a while and you've got a visa, you shouldn't have any issue with this. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what has happened is the crisis may force a change. Now, again, if you don't like all these little drones buzzing around you, which not many people will, then you might have to go back to Australia for a temporary period, to safeguard your family, safeguard yourself. Now, as long as you're just heading back temporarily whilst the Gulf War is on, whilst the madness is happening, then that will not necessarily change your residency. The fact that you go back to Australia itself is not a change of residency event. But what will happen is all of the elements around that will be considered as to say, did you relocate back or are you just down there? Now, COVID was a classic example where many people were told by the government, come back now, we're closing the borders, it was unsafe, the world was in a mess. So the fact that people came back during COVID and stayed for longer periods, more than 6 months, more than a year, that didn't change their residency because it wasn't their intention to relocate. They were just there because of the pandemic. This Middle East crisis is exactly the same scenario. It's not your intention to relocate, you're just there for safety in the short term. Now, again, make sure you've got supporting evidence and communication, emails, WhatsApp, messages. That's the best evidence you can have to say, hey, we're over here, we're getting a bit nervous, the wife and kids are coming back, the husband and kids are coming back, we're going to come back for a couple of months until this is over. We're just nervous. So the more formal confirmation that you can produce, if ever asked, are you here just because of that or are you here permanently, the more evidence that supports your temporary relocation, the better off you are for tax purposes. In terms of things that would change when you go back, is if you maintain your non-resident status, which again is as long as you've got evidence that you didn't close out of the Middle East and move back, you've just, left because it's dangerous for the moment, then you will stay as a non-resident. Now, the advantages of that is that you would only be taxed on Australian-sourced income, which is Australian property rental or Australian corporate salaries. Now, if you are still being paid from overseas, you will not have to pay tax on your overseas salary if you are still non-resident. But the thing is, if you do earn Australian, just like now, you would not have any tax-free allowance, and you do not get the lower tax rates of 0 for the first 20 and 15% for the next 20,000. You start at 30 cents in the dollar tax from $1. But again, if you are still non-resident, importantly, have not relocated back, then only your non-Australian salary from the Middle East while you're doing the work down there is incidental and not taxable. You still don't pay tax on Australian share dividends and investments, and you're not paying tax on any Dubai income, rental, or anything that's over there. You would not be entitled to franking credits, and you would, if you earn interest in Australia, you would still only have to pay 10% withholding tax. But importantly also, you're not charged or entitled to use Medicare. So don't go back and register for Medicare. That could be problematic because you would be signing a declaration saying, hey, I'm living in Australia, please give me medical benefits. If you do that, then it's hard to argue that your residency status hasn't changed because you're signing a declaration confirming that it has. So just be careful there. Make sure you've got travel insurance. That should cover you for most of it. Check with your insurance in Dubai as to whether they will cover you if you're overseas at the time. Your residency will only change if the circumstances change. So i.e. if you go for a couple of months and it gets worse and you say, you know what, I can't go back, it's too difficult, it's too dangerous, then at the point where you say, I can't go back, technically, that is when your residency changes. Now again, it would be evidenced by things that you might give your notice of the job, you might cancel your visa, you might end your lease on your accommodation, and you might try and get your stuff shipped back to Australia. So all these would be self-evident of you believing your circumstances had changed, and that is when your residency changes. Now again, you'd have some sort of communication with your boss. Hey boss, this isn't working. We might have to stay down here. Can that work? No, sorry, then I'll have to resign. One of the important things is you can be in Australia more than 183 days and maintain that non-residency. But importantly, the law does say that you are a tax resident if in Australia for more than 183 days, but it does say, comma, unless the commissioner believes you're living overseas. So it's very important that you can demonstrate that you have not stopped living in Dubai and relocated to Australia. So keep your ties, keep your apartment, keep your things there, and hopefully you're just hiding for the couple of weeks, couple of months that this madness continues. See how you go. If you did become a residency, I don't want you to be overly concerned about that because it's just circumstantial. There's nothing you can do about it. But it basically would be you making the formal decision that we might as well stay here. Our time there is done, at least for the next little while. Now, what does happen is the first thing is that your worldwide income is now taxable in Australia, but importantly, only from the date of residency change. So if you go back now in March and you do end up saying, you know what, we should stay here, it's not that bad after all, you would not pay tax on the salary you'd earned in the Middle East from July to March. That would have been overseas and not taxable, but you would start paying once you make the decision to stay permanently from that day onwards. So if you stay on a Middle East payroll, you'll have to declare the April, May, June income in your Australian tax return. You can move money backwards and forwards without any tax consequences whatsoever. So don't be afraid to do that. You'll need that money to survive. It's not taxable, the movement of cash. But what would happen is if it earned interest, you would have to declare it. So only if it makes money, not if it was your money, would you have to pay tax. If you're living in your family home that you had bought or had on return, it now becomes a tax-free asset, but not entirely tax-free. There's always this misconception that I'll move in for a couple of months, sell it, no tax. If it was taxable because it was rented for a period, then it does not become tax-free. It becomes tax-free pro rata. So if you live in it for 2 years and rented it for 3, you'd get 2/5 of the profit tax-free, not the whole 5 years. If you've got superannuation funds, pension plans, provident funds, you've got 6 months to move them down from when your residency changes. The tax office has been a bit mischievous with provident funds, but talk to us about that. If you keep a property in Dubai, you need to get a valuation done because only profits in the future above that valuation would be subject to tax. Now, this could be a big problem for many people because we have to get a valuation at the best possible price, not the worst. Now, the difficult thing is if someone is valuing it maybe today, they might say, oh, wow, because everyone's leaving, because the bomb's dropping, we think it's gone down. Now, we don't have to do the valuation straight away. We just have to have it dated as at when your residency changes. So we can always do retrospective when the calmness has returned and get a sensible valuation in a calm position rather than get one now where everybody's panicking. And of course, any obviously shares in Australia or overseas, similar to the property, only future profits need to be declared for tax purposes. A lot of people think you have to sell any property or shares or investments you have. You don't. You can keep them. There's no issue there. They will not become taxable on past profits, only future profits. In fact, if you've got them worth $100 now when you relocate and they end up selling them for $90, you would get a loss on that $10. So it doesn't work out too bad. And you might recall we've got a 50% discount currently in Australia for assets, property, etc. Now, there is debate in Australia at the moment as to whether they're going to change that, and that we'll know that in the May budget. But if you're overseas as an expat, your discount is currently 0. So it can't get any worse, no matter what changes they do. It's currently 0. But if you relocate and your residency changes, you start getting that 50% discount on anything that you have in Australia. So Australian property previously, or your overseas property, overseas shares, Australian shares from the day on. Now, to qualify for that 50% discount, you must have owned that property for more than 12 months. You must have owned those shares for more than 12 months. Now, for Australian property, it's from date of purchase, which is the contract date. But for shares and overseas property, it's from the day of return and change of residence. So the 12-month start date is when you said, you know what, let's not go back, let's stay in Australia. And it's important to remember that, and it's always based on the contract. If you are going to consider staying or decide to stay, make sure you come and talk to us. You know, we've got lots of planning options. We've got some great modelling that'll help you understand what is the impact of you living in Australia from a tax point of view, once you sort of gather what your faculties will be, what's going on, what your remuneration, etc. So, you know, make sure you do planning. When you're in the Middle East in a zero tax country, you can ignore tax advisors like us, but when you're back in Australia, trust me, you're going to need to talk to us and you're going to need to listen. So please do so. You know, importantly, at a time like now, it's scary, it's dangerous, it's unusual. You need help, and the great news is we're there to help you. So please reach out if you need a chat. You know, we do a lot of different things. We can confirm that residency for you so you don't have the worry of that, as well as everything else. We can do your repatriation tax planning, even if it's, I'm not going to come back now, but what about later? What about in 5 years, etc. That's what we do. We're the best at it. And obviously looking after your tax compliance, your current tax returns on your property, you know, your tax issues when you go back to Australia. And at a time like now, you do need to consider, have I got my money working as hard as it can be? So if you need alternate income to help you get through this, then talk to us. We've got some good options for you there. But we're very keen to support you, to give you less pressure so that you can make the best decisions for you and your family. We wish you all the best. We wish you all the luck. You know, we've been in the Middle East, in Dubai, you know, for 20 odd years, you know, and I'll be backwards and forwards, planes permitting, over the next couple of months to see you. So hope to see you safe, well, and, you know, all things normalized as quickly as possible. Good luck.